Let's take a big picture look at the notion of pin escapes. The first thing I want to introduce you to is a very obvious problem associated with getting out of pins. I often refer to this as the specificity problem. You will notice that there are many different ways to get pinned, and even within each separate pin, there are different ways your opponent can actually enact the pin. In other words, there are many variations of mounted position, side position, north-south. Each different pin and each different pin variation requires a precise form of escape relative to that specific scenario that you find yourself in. Imagine a situation where you have 5 padlocks in front of you and 5 keys, and you don't know which one is matched to which. Only a fool would expect one padlock key to open all 5 padlocks. Of course, the real skill would be in identifying which key is correlated with which padlock, and once you've done that, you could open all 5 padlocks without a problem. So too with pin escapes. There are different forms of pin and different variations within each one of those pins, and you must, in time, learn the appropriate way to unlock each one of those padlocks in front of you. For example, if I'm mounted on top of Shaun Williams, I can hold myself in many different ways. I can go left crossface, right crossface. We can go hand inside the lapel. We can go 2 hands on the floor. I can have my knees low down by his belt. I can have a high mounted position. There are many, many different variations within the mounted position. Side position, even more so, and north-south too. And there's a requirement on our part to use the specific escape for the specific pin that we're in. Because there are such a large number of different variations within each pin, it can be tough to lay down a precise, systematic, step-by-step approach to getting out of all pins. The system that you would propose would be rather lengthy and difficult to remember under combat conditions. So what I'm going to propose to you is a checklist system. This is essentially a heuristic approach to systems, where we offer a set of guidelines, rules of thumb, etc., to guide your behavior. Because it's a heuristic system, giving broad guidelines rather than a step-by-step algorithmic system, it gives you the flexibility required to get out of a rapidly changing pin situation where your opponent is going from one type of pin to another or one variation of a pin to another. First, let's just have a look at the specificity problem in itself. Okay? Let's say, for example, I was bottom side control, and Shaun Williams was holding one form of pin. This one here, the top head and arm, where he's got my arm and head controlled by a crossface and an underhook, and his hands are locked. Okay? This is one problem for me to deal with. If Shaun Williams took his right hand and started blocking my hip, that would create a different pin for me to get out of. Why? How does this work? Okay? Here, his right elbow is blocking my hip, and when the hands lock, he's created closed wedges around my body. This does an excellent job of controlling the movement of my head and shoulders. However, it doesn't do much to control the movement of my hips and legs, and as a result, it's not unheard of for me to get my legs inside quite easily in these situations. Okay? So Shaun Williams might be cognizant of that and take his hand and create a defensive wedge right there in front of my legs and hips. Now, it can be very difficult for me to bring my knees inside as I just did. He could strengthen this by taking his arm over to a reverse crossface position. And now my head can't move in that direction. And you can see now that my attempts to put him back in guard may well stumble and fall. So now we might have to switch entirely to a different mode of escape, where my primary emphasis now is on getting hands inside that wedge down by the hips and working my way up to a position onto my knees. From here, it may not be difficult for us to go back into guard and begin working from a guard position like so. You can see what happened here. My training partner was in one version of a pin, and he switched to a second variation. And that required on my part a change in an approach to escape. Initially, the elbow escape would have been just fine, but then it was blocked, and I had to switch to another mode of escape. because there's a very large number of pins and an even larger number of pin variations, that means you've got to cover a lot of ground. And the most important thing for you to develop is a mental skill, and that is the skill of identification. The single biggest ramification of the specificity problem is that it points the way towards mastery of pin escapes. We have to become masters of identifying what is the actual problem you are trying to overcome. And because it's a dynamic problem, a problem that can change as your opponent moves around you, you've got to keep up with changes in the problem. If he presents problem A at a given moment in time and then switches to a second problem B, you've got to keep up with that. That requires on your part as a developing student an ability to identify what pin am I being held in and then correlate that with the appropriate escape. That skill of identification is going to be a huge part of your ability to get out of a punishing pin or a series of pins whenever you're underneath your opponent. I'm going to give you some rough guidelines now that will run throughout this instructional video. They will be illustrated in great detail as you go further and further into the video. But I want to give you an overview and a simple checklist system, a heuristic system, which will give you a general picture of what you're trying to accomplish when you get out of a bad position. Step number one on our checklist is always the same. Understand something. When you're in the bottom of the pin, you're vulnerable. Okay, you're not just down on points. You're in a position where you can be finished. You're in a position where your opponent can go to another form of pin and get more points against you. In other words, it's already a bad situation and it's quite easy for things to get worse. So step number one is always going to be to reduce our vulnerability. In particular, you're going to reduce your vulnerability to submission holds, and you're going to reduce your vulnerability to your opponent scoring more points on you by going to another form of pin. So say, for example, we were bottom side control. Here, I am maximally vulnerable to my opponent because I have no defensive arms in place and my arms are in an outside position. Shaun Williams owns all the inside real estate. His shoulder is inside my shoulder. His right arm is inside and underneath my left arm. His right knee is inside my hip. His head is inside my shoulder. And as a result, I have no inside position whatsoever. He could hold me here all night in this position. Moreover, he would also find it very easy to go into submission holds using this underhook. He would also find it very easy to go to submission holds on the near side arm because my elbow is trapped up here, where he can easily sit into a variety of submission holds. So clearly, the first thing I need to do is to reduce my vulnerability to submissions. And that's all going to come by bringing everything inside. So our first step is going to be to take our elbow and bring the elbow inside, like so. Now we're going to reduce the vulnerability here by bringing our forearm inside and underneath our training partner's neck and jawline, or alternatively punching through and getting inside and underneath here. Okay? You have now significantly reduced your vulnerability to your opponent's moves. Once again, if my arms start here in a rather hopeless looking situation, we have to start by reducing the vulnerability of the near arm by putting our forearm inside our training partner's hip. Then we have to bring our hand into a more sound defensive position, which denies an easy underhook control, or alternatively gives us our own underhook. And from here, we're significantly less vulnerable. Our elbows are much closer to our own body, and we have inside position. Even when Shaun Williams locks his hands tightly here, his control is rendered insignificant by my arm position. So step number one is always going to be to reduce our vulnerability to submissions. There's a second sense in which we need to decrease our vulnerability in terms of him going to another pin. So, for example, if Shaun Williams pins me across side, it's quite easy for him to slide his knee across my stomach and score more points by going into the mounted position. Alternatively, he could bring his arm across, sit through, and step over into the mounted position. This too would score him additional points. So it's important in these situations that we reduce our vulnerability by bringing our body into a posture that makes that more difficult. One is to take our knee and put it here at our training partner's hip, and put my foot slightly higher than my own knee. Now when my training partner goes to slide his knee across the stomach, there's considerable resistance. It's also important that my elbow go inside my training partner's hip, so that even if I was deficient with my leg position, as he goes in to slide into the mount, I could easily come out the back door on the other side. Okay? So by putting my arms in inside position and blocking hips, we're greatly reducing our vulnerability to both submission holds and to pins. So step number one in our heuristic system of escape will always be reduce your vulnerability. Okay? Step number two is to decrease the amount of discomfort that you are in. Remember, when a pin is well applied, it's not a pleasant experience. Okay? Strong cross-face pressure and other mechanical tricks can make the bottom position a very uncomfortable one indeed. Whenever you're faced with solving a difficult problem, it helps a lot if you're feeling comfortable. Okay? Imagine trying to solve a complex piece of a complex mathematical problem, one which required pencil and paper for you to work your way through over time to get it to a solution. And the entire time you were trying to solve the problem, you were being electrocuted. Okay? It's already a difficult problem, now it's a lot more difficult to solve. Okay? Physical discomfort makes any kind of problem-solving activity more difficult. So anything that you can do to reduce the amount of physical pressure that you're under, the amount of physical discomfort, is money in the bank. Okay? So let's look at some common ideas involved here. Okay, cross-face pressure. Whenever you feel a punishing crossface coming in here, and you can hear my voice changing as Sean Williams goes into applying more and more pressure, we need to do something about that. Okay, so we're going to take our hand and we're going to overwrap our training partner's shoulder and lock it right in here. As Sean Williams goes in to apply pressure, we're going to start a bridging action and a turn that brings his shoulder off our jawline. Will you be able to hold this forever? Nope. However, you will now be able to start going into your various escape strategies. Okay? Another effective method of dealing with strong cross-face pressure. The cross-face is going in this direction. I'm going to vector it over the other shoulder by taking my own bicep cross-face. As Sean Williams goes to drive his cross-face, we're going to misdirect his head to the other side of our body. He can't apply a cross-face unless his head is on one side of my head and his shoulder is on the other. When his head and shoulder are on the same side, there's no cross-face. Okay? So we've got to reduce the discomfort that we're in. We start with a strong bridge and we move his head across. And now we can get legs inside, and now the cross-face pressure has been reduced considerably. Okay? Other ways of reducing pressure. Sean Williams is going to put all his weight on my diaphragm, and you're going to hear my voice changing as that diaphragm pressure mounts. Okay, this is an uncomfortable thing. Right now it doesn't feel bad, but if we were engaged in a hard 10-minute match and I was already tired before he got this on, this is a bad situation now. My breathing's been interfered with. Okay, so how can I relieve this? We relieve it by getting off the flat of our back. As our opponent holds us in tight here, look how the simple action of turning onto my side creates a much better ability to bear my training partner's weight. Now there's a danger he's going to use a cross-face to re-flatten me out and go back and work here. However, every time we turn onto our side, we get opportunities to bring legs back in. And have faith that when the legs start coming back in, it's significantly more difficult for him to start reapplying that pressure. Okay? So we always want to start with the idea of taking away cross-face pressure and getting as much as possible onto our side. If someone's directly mounted on me, here, flat on my back, I feel all their weight, and you can hear it in my voice as he comes in, starts applying a strong cross-face. I never want to turn into a cross-face. I turn into it, it just makes things worse. Okay? So we always turn with the cross-face, and we start to turn onto our side. We get frames inside, and now from here, even when he locks in tight with his feet, we have an ability to start bringing legs in. Okay, once we get legs in, then we can start the escape business and move out of it. So step number 2 is always going to be to take the small steps required to make whatever discomfort you're in manageable. Okay? Sometimes it might be something just as small as getting your breath back, of taking 3 sharp, deep breaths into the pit of your lungs. And this too, a seemingly small step, can give you the wherewithal to actually go out and start planning an escape. It's difficult to plan an escape when you're in extreme discomfort. So step number 1, reduce your vulnerability. Step number 2, reduce whatever discomfort you're in as much as possible. May still be uncomfortable, but just make it manageable. Okay? Now, this brings us on to the third and arguably the most important step. This is the one I want you guys focusing on a lot as you go to watch the rest of this video. This is the step of identifying the problem. There's nothing more sad in the sport of jiu-jitsu of watching people work really, really hard in the wrong direction. Okay? Imagine you were given the task of digging up some valuable piece of merchandise that had been buried in the earth, and someone gave you a treasure map which was just 100% wrong, and you went out and you spent 5 days digging a massive trench and you found nothing. Okay? Then someone gave you the correct map, you went over, you did some digging, and you quickly found the treasure. There would be something sad about that story, that there was 5 days of wasted effort that could have been alleviated just by getting the correct treasure map from the start. So too with pin escapes. All the time I see people in a pin applying an escape which is clearly not appropriate for the very pin that they're in, doing hard work, getting tired, frustrated, and exhausted, and then nothing to show for it. So it's absolutely critical that we develop the skill of identifying what we're doing here. What are we in? What is the problem in front of us? How are we going to solve the problem? So when someone gets on top of us, our first thing here is always to reduce our vulnerability. That always comes from bringing our limbs inside to the greatest degree possible. Then we want to minimize the discomfort that we're in. We might still be uncomfortable, but we want to minimize it. So we play games with the crossface, we bring our body in close, we turn onto our side, etc. Now I want to start to identify, how is my opponent holding me? In particular, where are the wedges they're using to control me? Okay. Here, my opponent has opted for what is arguably the most popular form of side control, pin, where he's got a crossface and an underhook, and he's closed the wedges by locking his hands. So in other words, all of his wedging force is placed around my head and shoulders, but that provides ample opportunity for the lower body to move. Okay. My opponent can change that by taking his hand down here to the hip. Now he has a wedge on the far side and a wedge on the near side. So now he has a good ability to wedge my head in one direction, but not the other, and he has a great ability to stop my knee from going in like so. So instead of my leg going in, which is easily stopped by my training partner, I now identify the new problem. The problem is now changed, and I need a new solution. The basis of the solution is always the same. I want to get inside my training partner's wedges, but he's got different wedges now. So instead of bringing a knee inside, which is proving to be impossible against this grip, you bring a hand inside. And I still work with the principle of inside control, it's just that I'm using it in a different fashion. Instead of a leg going inside, it's an arm. And as a result, we can come up and into a good attacking position. So you can see the pattern that's starting to emerge here. Ultimately, the solution is always the same. Get your limbs inside your opponent's limbs. His limbs are wedges around your body, and you want to get inside his wedges. The question will always be, how are you going to do that? And that will change depending upon how your opponent is holding you. Sometimes it will be your legs. Sometimes it will be your arms. Which one you choose is something that I will be showing you in the course of this video. But initially, at least, looking at the big picture, I want you guys starting with these first 3 critical steps. Step number 1, reduce your vulnerability. Step number 2, reduce your physical discomfort to the greatest degree possible. You might still be uncomfortable, but try your best. Step number 3, identify the problem. Where are the wedges and how are you going to get inside them? Will it be with your arms? Will it be with your legs? Now, it's time to get into step number 4. This is the idea of moving our opponent's body weight. Understand what a pin really is. A pin, lie down, Sean, is a set of wedges reinforced by body weight. Okay? So here I have one wedge underneath my training partner's body. Here I have a second wedge underneath my training partner's body, and I've reinforced those wedges with my body weight. And as a result, we have a tight pin across our training partner's side. Okay? So you can see the sense in which any pin is always the same thing. Okay? All the major pins of jiu-jitsu, other than knee on belly, are essentially the same story. It's a set of wedges positioned around the body, reinforced by body weight. So our goal is to first get inside his wedges, and then secondly, start moving the body weight that reinforces those wedges. So, if we have 4 legs on top of us, pinning us down, and we have managed to get to some degree inside those wedges. Now the next thing is to start moving his body weight. And that will come from 2 major body movements. There are others, and we'll be looking at them in the video, but the 2 big ones that I want you spending most of your time on are bridging and shrimping. And don't worry, we'll be going into a lot of detail on bridging and shrimping in this video. But initially, at least, we want to focus on the idea of a bridge that moves our opponent's body weight significantly, so that his center of gravity is no longer in a position to reinforce the wedges. And as a result, we can start bringing our body further and further inside his wedges and establish more and more inside control, so that from here we can start going into strong counter offense and getting people moving from on top of us. So once again, we've identified where the wedges are. In this case, they're around my head and shoulders. Okay? So we want to be able to get inside, and then from here, start moving body weight. One classic way is a bridging method. This bridge gets his body weight off, his center of gravity off my center of gravity, in a way which greatly facilitates getting inside our training partner's body. And from here, it won't be a difficult thing for us to play with the notion of inside control. Please note that sometimes you will have to move your opponent's body weight first to generate kazushi, as we say, and then get inside. Most of the time you get inside control first, then you move the body weight. Sometimes the order switches, okay, and you have to be alive to that. You have to be sensitive to this. So the order of these can switch depending on the situation. Typically, it's something inside first, then move the body weight. Sometimes just to get inside, you've got to move his body weight. You've got to bridge and shrink. Okay? The basic body movements that involve here, I'll just demonstrate this by myself. The idea of bridging, the key element is we never want to bridge straight up and come straight back down. We always want what we call single shoulder bridges, where we move an opponent's body weight and we go onto one shoulder and a knee on the floor. So that instead of moving our opponent's body straight up to the ceiling, where it just comes right back down once we come back down to the floor, we want to move him off us rather than up and down on top of us. The key is asymmetrical bridging, where instead of bridging with 2 symmetrical legs straight up, one leg moves out. And as a result, we're in a position to take his body weight out here off us so that we can start getting frames inside and putting people back in guard, getting up to our knees, etc., etc. The other key element is the idea of shrimping. Now, shrimping is a movement done in most jiu-jitsu schools every day when the class starts. And typically it's done as a kind of a lackadaisical exercise, sliding up and down the mats. You guys have to go better than that. Okay? There are 3 main forms of shrimping that we use. There are others, but the 3 big ones that I want you to focus on, we'll spend most of our time in this video, involve the idea of, first, a power shrimp, which moves my opponent's body weight. Okay? Where we take our opponent's body and we move with the same motion we saw in a bridge, and then we add a shrimping movement that enables us to bring knee and elbow together. The next is a sliding shrimp. We practice sliding along the mat. We need to bring our hips up to our shoulder line, so my feet come to the outside to maximize the distance that I cover, and then from here we shrimp all the way out of my body jackknives, so that my elbows, hands, and head are very close together. And then from here, we can slide out from side to side to finish escapes. Okay? The third form of shrimp is a reverse shrimp, where instead of pushing off the floor, we turn away from an opponent, fix on the floor, and pull ourselves towards a foot. So instead of pushing away from our feet, like so, classical shrimp, we go through and we pull like a hamstring curl. And this too can be a very useful thing. So for example, if I'm being pinned across side, we bring the camera over here, we can turn our body away from our opponent and pull so we can get slipping out the back door. Then we can throw legs inside, start turning on opponents, and we end up in good attacking position, ready to counter attack. So these three variations of shrimping are very important. We'll be covering them in a lot of detail in this video as we progress further on. Between bridging and shrimping, this will constitute about 90% of the physical movements that will generate kazushi, off balancing in your opponent, and get that weight that reinforces the wedges off you. Once you start moving that body weight, it becomes a lot easier to go into the next step in our sequence. So we started with the idea of, first, let's reduce our vulnerability. Second, let's reduce our discomfort so we can think clearly. Step number 3 was to identify the precise problem in front of us. Don't just move for the sake of moving. Identify the problem and correlate right back with the appropriate body movement. Then we had to generate some kind of kazushi or off balancing to get our opponent's body moving so we could start getting more and more of our body inside. This brings us to arguably the most important element of all pin escapes, and the one I want you guys spending a lot of time training. This is the idea of majority inside control. When you first go in to get your limbs inside your opponent, typically it's your elbow and forearm. It's one limb, okay? Your forearm inside his hip. So for example, I'm being pinned across side. Typically, the first movement is to get here, my elbow inside. So that for every inch that I move away from Sean Williams, when he tries to follow me, there's something stopping him. If I didn't have that, and I moved away from him, he would just follow me effortlessly, okay? What we need to do is we need to create situations where you're moving away from him at a greater rate than he can follow you. And that's what these frames are for, okay? So every time we go to move away, he finds it difficult to follow. And as a result, space develops between us, and now we have a good chance of putting it back in guard, okay? That's the basic idea we work with. Similar things happen when someone is mounted on us. We always want to get a forearm and elbow inside. So when he tries to come up into a high mount, he can't. Okay? And when I move away from him, I can start to create space into which the various forms of escape can start to occur. Okay? So there's always that desire to get our first limb inside. It's almost always an elbow and forearm. Okay? But we've got to go more than that. Ultimately, you're not going to escape and be effective from bottom until you have more of your limbs inside his than he has inside of you. Let's look at this mathematically. Sean Williams starts off with side control. Okay? How many items of inside control does he have? Well, he's got his head. His head is inside my shoulders. He's got his right arm. It's inside and underneath my arm is an underhook. He's got his shoulder, his left shoulder, inside my right shoulder. He's got his left knee inside my elbow. Come in close and block it out, Sean. So my arm is locked out in the cold here. He's got his right knee inside my hip. So he owns literally all of the inside real estate. He's got head inside, underhook inside, shoulder inside, left knee inside, right knee inside. What do I have inside? Zero, nothing. Okay, this is a losing situation. Sean Williams could hold me here all night. If I stayed here with my hands locked, he could literally hold me here until tomorrow. There's nothing I could do to get out. In addition, he could go into a vast number of submission holds. Okay? So our whole thing is to start by getting one element inside. 9 times out of 10, it's an elbow and a forearm. It doesn't look like much, but it's a foot in the door, and that's what you need. Okay? Now, once we get one thing inside, it's a process of moving his body weight and progressively getting more and more of your body inside. So now I take my knee and I put it inside Sean Williams' knee. So now I've got 2 items of inside position. Okay, I had 0, now I've got 2. My elbow is inside and my right knee is inside. Okay? I move my head away, hold tight. I move my head away and I take my hand and I bring my hand inside his bicep. Now I have 3 items of inside position. I have an inside tie with my right hand. My right knee is inside. Now, we need to move on from here. I take my left foot and I put my left foot in as a butterfly hook. So now we have 4 items of inside position. As we correct our body, I come through and I take an underhook. Now, I have more limbs inside Sean Williams than he has inside of me. And as a result, even though I'm underneath Sean, I'm still bearing his body weight to some degree. Sean, put all your weight on me. Because I have all the inside real estate, it's very easy for me to start generating effective motion from underneath. Do you see what's going on here? This cuts to the quick of what you'll be learning in this video. Everything we do is the attempt to first reduce our vulnerability and our discomfort. Then to identify the problem in front of us, and then to progressively work to own the inside real estate. It starts as a process. It starts with 1 item of inside real estate, usually the elbow and forearm. Okay, there are some exceptions to that, but that's by far and away the most common one. And then we must work progressively to get more and more inside real estate. This will involve body movements, usually bridging and shrimping on your part. It will involve getting more and more of your knees, feet, hands, elbows, etc. inside your opponents until a critical point is reached where you have more limbs inside your opponent than he is inside of you. Once you get majority inside control, you can start to move offensively and effectively from bottom position. He will no longer be able to use body weight and wedges to control you. You now own all the inside real estate. His wedges are now shut out, and his body will no longer hold you in place. Let's have a look at this in another context. This time, bottom mounted position. Okay, Sean Williams has his head inside my shoulder, his shoulder inside my shoulder, his feet locked in, and from here, I don't have any items of inside control, 0. Okay? So we bring a hand and we bring it inside and underneath. So at least I have an elbow inside his hip now. Now I take an elbow and I put it inside his knee. So I've got 2 items of inside position. Now we need to disturb his body weight and create Kazushi. That's where the single shoulder bridge comes in. Now I bring my knee inside his knee. Now we have 3 items of inside position. How many does Sean Williams have? All he's got is head position. I'm winning 3-1. And as a result, it's very easy for me to start moving his body weight. Now I put an elbow inside the other knee. I put a hand inside the bicep. And even though I'm underneath Sean Williams, I own almost all of the inside real estate. The only inside position he has is this arm. And it's becoming a liability to him at this point because I have so much of the other inside real estate. So that as we come around the corner, you will soon see from here your escapes start leading directly into counter offense. So this is another example of gaining majority inside control over time. Understand something. You don't just get majority inside control. It's a process. It begins and is taken in increments. It starts with 1, a foot in the door, and then you work over time, gaining quickly, smoothly, more and more of the inside real estate until a critical moment is reached where you're in control. You're still underneath, but it doesn't matter. What enabled him to control me in the first place were wedges supported by body weight. Now you've taken away almost all of his wedges, and you're moving his body weight easily as a result. And now, for the first time, the magic can start to happen. You can start working effectively from underneath someone's body weight and moving them in the directions you want on towards victory. And that is the basis of the escape system that I want you to focus on. This progression from extreme vulnerability on your part to extreme vulnerability on his part. Okay, it's a process that goes on in the fashion I just described. This entire video will be built around the very notions that I just talked to you about, of step number 1, reducing your vulnerability. Step number 2, reducing your discomfort so you can think clearly. Step number 3, clearly identifying the problem in front of you and correlating that with a specific solution. Be aware that the problem can change. Your opponent can go from one pin to another, and that can happen quickly. So your mind has to be alert to this. Okay? In this video, we'll be showing you the various forms of pin that you could be held down by, the variations, etc., and how you can react to each one. But that will require some memorization on your part. Then the battle for inside control. It starts typically with just one limb. 9 times out of 10, it's an elbow and forearm. There are some exceptions, but 9 times out of 10, that's true. Then it's about that magical progression from one element of inside control to as many as possible. And as you finally get to a point where you own more inside real estate than he does, that's when you can go from being ineffective in bottom position to highly effective in bottom position. And you can start beating people. You can start winning matches from there. That, how would you say, a checklist or a heuristic system of escapes is what this video will be about.